20. Black R&B soul artists who disappeared without a trace. They once ruled the airwaves, lit up concert halls, and shaped the sound of a generation, then suddenly they vanished. No scandals, no farewells, just silence. These 20 black R&B and soul legends disappeared from the spotlight without a trace, leaving behind timeless hits and unanswered questions. Was it the industry's fault? Or did the world simply stop listening? This isn't just a trip down memory lane, it's a wake-up call. Watch till the end and let us know in the comments. Which artist shocked you the most and who deserves a second chance? Sylvester. In the vibrant heartbeat of 1970s San Francisco, one voice cut through the noise with unapologetic glamour, electrifying charisma, and a falsetto that felt like freedom itself. That voice belonged to Sylvester James Jr., known simply as Sylvester, an openly gay, gender non-conforming black artist who redefined what it meant to own the stage in an era of rigid norms and rampant discrimination. Born in 1947 in Los Angeles and raised in a devout Pentecostal household, Sylvester's early love for gospel music clashed with his authentic self-expression. Cast out by his church and family, he fled to San Francisco, where he found belonging in the city's underground queer performance art scene. By the mid-70s, Sylvester had become a disco superstar, blending church-rooted vocals with bold fashion and synthesizer-laced beats. His 1978 breakout hits You Make Me Feel Mighty Real and Dance Disco Heat weren't just chart toppers, they were liberation anthems for LGBTQ+ communities. At his peak, Sylvester filled stadiums, sold millions of records, and captivated fans with his gender-defying style. Yet as disco's popularity plummeted in the early 80s and the AIDS crisis devastated his community, the industry that once celebrated him began turning away. Rather than retreat, Sylvester used his platform to become one of the first celebrities to publicly campaign for AIDS awareness, even as his own health began to fail. He continued to record and perform until his final days, but mainstream support had all but disappeared. Sylvester passed away in 1988, at just 41 from AIDS-related complications. His flamboyant voice and activism left a trailblazing legacy, but his name is still too often overlooked in conversations about queer history, disco music, and black excellence. How is it that someone so bold, so original, and so ahead of their time could simply fade from the cultural memory? And did you ever truly know the story behind the man who made you feel mighty real? Betty Wright. Before she was old enough to vote, Betty Wright had already claimed her throne in soul music history. At just 17, she burst onto the scene with Clean Up Woman, a track that sold over 1 million copies and became an instant R&B classic. But Betty wasn't just another young star. She was a powerhouse with a voice full of grit, fire, and emotional intelligence far beyond her years. Raised in Miami and trained in gospel music, Betty fused raw emotion with precise technique. In the 1970s, she delivered hit after hit, Tonight is the Night, No Pain, No Gain, and the Grammy-winning Where is the Love? But behind the scenes, she was also breaking barriers. At a time when the industry was dominated by men, Betty wrote, arranged, and produced her own records, a rarity for any artist, let alone a young black woman. As music shifted in the 1980s toward electronic production and synthetic beats, Betty's organic, instrument-rich style fell out of step with mainstream tastes. Labels chased trends, and Betty's chart presence slowly faded. Yet she never stopped working. She became a mentor to a new generation of artists like Joss Stone and Keishia Cole, teaching them how to protect their artistry and stand strong in a ruthless industry. Despite her trailblazing work behind the scenes, many fans assumed Betty had disappeared. In truth, she was simply working outside the spotlight, still recording, still performing, still teaching until her death from cancer in 2020 at age 66. Did you know that one of the fiercest female forces in R&B helped shape today's stars behind the curtain? And how is it that someone who gave so much could fade from the center stage so quietly? And now prepare to meet a woman whose beauty, Broadway roots, and haunting ballads were hiding something much darker underneath. Can you guess which soul diva's tragic end left a void that's never been filled? Phyllis Hyman. She had the poise of a runway model, the command of a Broadway diva, and a voice so lush it could make time stand still. Phyllis Hyman wasn't just a singer, she was an experience. From her debut in the late 1970s, she exuded elegance, emotional depth, and theatrical flair, captivating audiences with every note. But behind that dazzling exterior was a woman battling demons the world couldn't see. Born in Philadelphia in 1949, Phyllis began her journey performing with various groups before launching her solo career with the help of Norman Connors and producer Tom Bell. Her breakout hits like You Know How to Love Me, Can't We Fall in Love Again, and her signature song Living All Alone earned her critical praise and a devoted following. She even lit up the Broadway stage in Sophisticated Ladies, earning a Tony nomination alongside Gregory Hines. Yet mainstream superstardom always seemed just out of reach. Label changes, industry politics, and creative frustrations plagued her career. More tragically, Phyllis struggled privately with depression and feelings of being misunderstood, especially as she refused to compromise her artistry or appearance for commercial appeal. Despite her stunning talent, she often felt invisible in an industry that celebrated lighter, more marketable images. By the mid-1990s, she had grown weary, exhausted by personal heartbreaks and professional disappointments. On June 30th, 1995, just hours before she was scheduled to perform at the Apollo Theater, Phyllis Hyman died by suicide at age 45. She left behind not only a string of recordings that continue to move listeners today, but also a haunting question: what if the world had embraced her for exactly who she was, instead of trying to mold her into something else? Did you ever truly hear the pain behind the power in Phyllis's voice? And who was the velvet-voiced songbird whose whistle notes once soared into history only to be silenced by fate at just 31 years old? Minnie Riperton. When Minnie Riperton sang, it didn't just sound beautiful, it felt otherworldly. Her voice, with its astonishing 5-octave range and ethereal whistle tones, floated above the music like a dream you never wanted to wake from. Best known for her timeless hit, Lovin' You Minnie seemed destined for a long, iconic career. But fate had a crueler plan. Born in Chicago in 1947, Minnie's talent bloomed early. She trained at the Chicago Conservatory of Music, preparing for an operatic career before transitioning into soul and psychedelic rock. As the lead vocalist of Rotary Connection, she experimented with sound and genre, but it was her solo album, Perfect Angel, produced by Stevie Wonder, that changed everything. Released in 1974, the record gave birth to Lovin' You, a song so delicate yet vocally daring, it shot to #1 and became an instant classic. Behind the music, Minnie was a wife, a mother to future actress and comedian Maya Rudolph, and a fierce spirit. But in 1976, at just 29, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Doctors gave her months to live. Instead, Minnie became one of the first celebrities to speak openly about the disease, raising awareness with courage and grace. She was appointed a spokesperson for the American Cancer Society and continued to perform and record even through chemotherapy. Minnie defied the odds for 3 years, but in July 1979, the world lost her at the age of 31. Her voice, which had once soared beyond the limits of human range, was suddenly silenced, leaving behind only a handful of albums and an endless void. Did you realize the woman behind one of the softest love songs in history was battling for her life while the world was singing along? Denise Williams. With a voice so pure it seemed touched by divinity, Denise Williams could make even the hardest hearts pause. Her crystalline soprano and effortless high notes weren't just technically impressive, they were emotionally disarming. Known affectionately as Niecy, she crafted a sound that felt like sunlight on a Sunday morning. But despite her early chart-topping success, Denise's gradual disappearance from mainstream music has left many fans wondering, where did she go? Born in Gary, Indiana in 1950, Denise grew up singing gospel in church before working as a backup vocalist for none other than Stevie Wonder. But she quickly stepped into the spotlight on her own, releasing her debut solo album in 1976. With hits like Free and Silly, her tender, soaring vocals made her stand out in a crowded R&B landscape. Then came 1984's Let's Hear It for the Boy, a pop smash that topped the Billboard Hot 100 and became synonymous with the Footloose soundtrack. For a moment, Denise Williams was a household name, a crossover star with both R&B credibility and pop appeal. But as the musical tide turned in the late 80s and early 90s toward harder-edged hip-hop and New Jack Swing, Denise's brand of melodic angelic soul became less commercially viable. Rather than chase trends, she turned inward, returning to her gospel roots. She won 4 Grammy Awards in that category, but her mainstream visibility faded. By the 2000s, many casual fans didn't even realize she was still recording. Denise never stopped singing, she just changed her audience. Her story isn't one of failure, but of quiet realignment with purpose and faith. Did you grow up dancing to Let's Hear It for the Boy, never knowing that Denise Williams was also a gospel legend in disguise? Thelma Houston. In the golden glow of disco's prime, few voices could match the commanding presence of Thelma Houston. Her searing performance on Don't Leave Me This Way didn't just top charts. It became a cultural anthem. When that song exploded in 1977, earning her a Grammy Award for Best Female R&B Vocal Performance, it seemed Thelma was on the fast track to superstardom. But as the glitter faded and musical trends shifted, the spotlight that once embraced her slowly dimmed. Born in Mississippi in 1946 and raised in Long Beach, California, Thelma started her musical journey singing gospel. Her first major label album came out on Motown Records, but it wasn't until her 4th album that lightning struck with Don't Leave Me This Way, a fiery reinterpretation of a Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes song that she transformed into a disco masterpiece. Her voice, bold, soulful, and impossibly dynamic, made dance floors erupt across America and beyond. However, success in the disco world was often fleeting. As the 1980s approached and disco fell out of favor, Thelma's mainstream appeal waned. Despite continuing to record and tour, she was unfairly branded by many as a one-hit wonder, a label that completely overlooked her range and the depth of her catalog. Songs like Saturday Night, Sunday Morning and her work in later years showcased a versatile artist who refused to be boxed in. Thelma never stopped performing. She continued to tour internationally, act on stage and television, and even released new material well into the 2000s. But for many casual listeners, she remained frozen in time, forever linked to one explosive moment on the charts, while the rest of her artistry was hidden in the shadows. Did you ever take a deeper listen beyond Don't Leave Me This Way, and realize Thelma Houston was never meant to be just a chapter in disco history, but a whole book in soul music's library? Shirley Brown. In 1974, Shirley Brown gave the world a front-row seat to one of soul music's most iconic confrontations. Woman to Woman. Her emotional spoken-word-infused ballad wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural moment. With raw honesty and commanding vocals, Shirley laid bare the heartbreak of betrayal in a way that resonated deeply with women everywhere. The song topped the Billboard R&B chart and crossed over to the pop charts, signaling the arrival of a new powerhouse. Born in West Memphis, Arkansas, and raised singing gospel, Shirley had all the makings of a long-lasting soul legend. Her voice carried a richness and vulnerability reminiscent of Aretha Franklin, and her debut album for Stax Records was critically acclaimed. But just as her star began to rise, the very foundation beneath her crumbled. Stax Records, the label that nurtured Southern soul giants, was collapsing under financial pressure. Without the infrastructure and promotional muscle to support her momentum, Shirley's burgeoning career was abruptly stalled. Follow-up releases failed to gain the same traction, not because of lack of talent, but because the machinery that had once supported her was gone. Though many assumed she faded into obscurity, Shirley continued recording and performing, building a devoted following through live shows and independent releases. But mainstream audiences, shaped by radio and TV exposure, gradually lost sight of her. Shirley Brown never stopped being an artist. She just became one of soul music's best-kept secrets, a living legend still singing the truth, even if the industry stopped listening. Have you ever revisited Woman to Woman and realized it wasn't just a song? It was a blueprint for female empowerment long before it became a buzzword. Kenny Lynch. Long before diversity became a mainstream conversation in British entertainment, Kenny Lynch was already breaking barriers. In the early 1960s, he became one of the first Black British pop singers to appear regularly on national television. With smooth vocals and undeniable charm, he made history with hits like Up on the Roof and You Can Never Stop Me Loving You. For a time, Kenny Lynch wasn't just a singer, he was a symbol of progress. Born in East London in 1938, Kenny was the child of a Barbadian father and a British mother. He emerged at a time when black performers were nearly invisible in the UK's mainstream music scene. But Lynch didn't just sing. He wrote songs, acted in films, performed in comedy shows, and even toured with the Beatles before they became a global phenomenon. His versatility and charisma made him a beloved media figure across the UK. However, as musical tastes shifted and new generations of artists emerged, Kenny's presence in the recording industry gradually diminished. By the 1980s and 1990s, younger audiences were largely unaware of his trailblazing contributions. While he remained active in entertainment, especially in television variety shows and live comedy, his legacy as a pioneering black pop artist was often overshadowed by flashier stars. Lynch didn't vanish due to scandal or tragedy. He faded gently, almost politely, from the spotlight. But his impact on British pop culture, especially as a groundbreaker for black artists in the UK, is undeniable. Did you know one of the first black men to appear regularly on British television and tour with the Beatles is barely mentioned in music history books today? And what does that say about how quickly pioneers can be forgotten once the headlines fade? Candy Staton. Candy Staton has worn many musical identities. Gospel prodigy, Southern soul siren disco queen, and spiritual warrior. Yet through all her transformations, one thing remained: that unmistakable voice. Raw, honest, and tinged with heartache, her vocals were like letters from a woman who had lived every lyric. Born in Alabama in 1940, Candy's journey began in the gospel world as a child singer alongside the Soul Stirrers. In the late 60s and early 70s, she pivoted into soul-scoring emotional gems like I'm Just a Prisoner and her searing cover of Tammy Wynette's Stand By Your Man. But it was 1976's Young Hearts Run Free that took her global, a disco-era empowerment anthem about breaking free from toxic love. At her peak, Candy was a genre-defying star. She followed up with Victim and Nights on Broadway, proving her staying power beyond any trend. But as disco fell out of favor in the 80s, so did mainstream interest in her work. Rather than chase fading fame, Candy returned to gospel, found her faith again, and began releasing music on her own terms. Though she never fully regained pop chart success, her music never stopped evolving, and neither did her voice. With over 30 albums across decades, Candy remained a force in the gospel and soul communities, later earning a new generation of fans after her voice was sampled by acts like One Eskimo and Florence plus The Machine. She didn't disappear, she transformed, over and over again. Did you know the woman behind disco's fiercest anthem was also a gospel powerhouse and survivor of domestic abuse, industry betrayal, and personal rebirth? And why do we so often forget the women who refuse to fit into a single box? Teddy Pendergrass. At the height of his fame, Teddy Pendergrass wasn't just a singer, he was a sensation. Women packed arenas for his legendary ladies-only concerts. His baritone was rich, seductive, and instantly recognizable. Tracks like Turn Off the Lights, Close the Door, and Love TKO made him the undisputed king of sensual soul. But Teddy's life took a heartbreaking turn that silenced a career in full flight. Born in 1950 in Philadelphia, Teddy first rose to prominence as lead vocalist of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, giving voice to timeless hits like If You Don't Know Me By Now. In 1977, he launched a solo career that exploded 5 consecutive platinum albums, sold-out shows, and the admiration of fans and critics alike. But in March 1982, tragedy struck. A devastating car accident left Teddy paralyzed from the chest down. Just 31 at the time, he went from being one of the most electrifying performers in R&B to fighting for survival. Many believed his career was over, but Teddy refused to be silenced. He returned to the stage at Live Aid in 1985, then released several albums from his wheelchair, including the Grammy-nominated Joy. Though the industry buzz had quieted his voice, Soulful, deepened by experience, still captivated loyal fans. Despite the odds, he continued creating music until the early 2000s. His visibility faded as R&B evolved, but his influence never disappeared. When Teddy passed away in 2010, the outpouring of love was a reminder his absence from the spotlight didn't erase the impact he had on it. Did you ever wonder how Teddy Pendergrass kept singing love songs to millions even after the world stopped seeing him on stage? And how many artists today could survive what he did and still sound like hope? Althea Myers. You may not recognize her name immediately, but chances are you've danced, clapped, or smiled to one of her songs at some point. Alicia Myers, with her warm, spirited vocals and infectious energy, gave us I Want to Thank You, a track that became an anthem of joy, resilience, and gratitude. It still plays at weddings, cookouts, and Sunday morning radio decades after its release. Born in Detroit in 1957, Alicia started her career as a member of the group One Way, contributing lead vocals that brought their early records to life. But it wasn't long before she stepped out as a solo act. Her debut album, Alicia, dropped in 1981 and featured I Want to Thank You, a gospel-influenced dance floor groove that charted modestly at first but grew into a cult classic over time. Her music blended the spiritual and the sensual, danceable, yet deeply personal. With follow-ups like You Get the Best From Me, Say, 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 Alicia proved she wasn't a one-song wonder. Still, despite the quality of her material and the strength of her voice, mainstream radio and major labels didn't give her the push she deserved. By the late 80s, her presence in the spotlight began to fade. Health issues, including a battle with lupus, pulled her further from the public eye. She kept recording independently and occasionally appeared at festivals, but to many casual fans it felt as if she had vanished. And yet Alicia Myers never stopped inspiring. Her music lived on in samples by artists like Busta Rhymes and Mariah Carey, quietly influencing a new generation. Did you ever stop to ask who sang the song that's still bringing people to their feet 40 years later? And how does someone with a voice full of gratitude disappear from the conversation entirely? Freda Payne. To most, Freda Payne is synonymous with one unforgettable tune, Band of Gold. Released in 1970, the song's bittersweet blend of heartbreak and pop perfection made it a global sensation, topping the UK charts and reaching number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. But behind that sparkling hit was a singer with the range, resilience, and artistry to deserve so much more than one entry in pop culture memory. Born in Detroit in 1942, Freda's career began not with pop, but with jazz. She studied at the Detroit Institute of Musical Arts and performed alongside legends like Quincy Jones and Duke Ellington. Her versatility was unmatched. She could swing jazz belt-out soul and even hold her own on Broadway stages. But it was Band of Gold that catapulted her to international stardom. Ironically, the massive success of that single became both a blessing and a burden. Though she released follow-up hits like Bring the Boys Home, a Vietnam War protest song, and Deeper and Deeper, Freda found herself boxed in by the public's attachment to one song. As musical tastes evolved in the 80s and beyond, the industry moved on, and Freda's star gradually dimmed. But she never stopped working. She turned to acting, starring in theater productions and films. She continued to tour, often performing for audiences who may not have realized she had released more than 20 albums over her career. Despite being seen by many as a one-hit wonder, Freda Payne is far from it. Her voice remains as clear and powerful as ever, a living reminder of what soul music truly sounds like when delivered with class and control. Isn't it strange how one of the most played songs of the 70s can overshadow an entire lifetime of artistry? And if all you know is Band of Gold, what else have you missed from Frida's treasure chest of talent? Martha Reeves, Martha and the Vandellas. In the heyday of Motown, Martha Reeves didn't just sing the hits, she set them on fire. As the lead vocalist of Martha and the Vandellas, she brought raw, unfiltered passion to songs like Dancing in the Street Heatwave and Nowhere to Run. Her voice was urgent, commanding, and electrified with emotion, a perfect match for the turbulent 1960s. Born in Alabama and raised in Detroit, Martha rose from being a Motown secretary to one of its most dynamic performers. With a voice that could cut through brass and a stage presence that rivaled the Supremes, Martha and her group became a Motown cornerstone. Their music wasn't just catchy, it had grit, soul, and defiance. But as the 1970s arrived, everything began to change. Motown shifted its headquarters to Los Angeles and focused its energy on newer, flashier acts. The Vandellas disbanded in 1972, and Martha launched a solo career. But without the full backing of the label, her efforts didn't receive the attention they deserved. The powerful voice that once defined the streets of Detroit gradually faded from the mainstream radar. Still, Martha never stopped performing. She became an advocate for artists' rights, even running for public office in Detroit. She recorded gospel, soul, and jazz, and toured consistently for decades, but for many outside her loyal fan base, she remained a nostalgic name attached to oldies radio. Did you know that while the world kept dancing in the streets, the voice behind the anthem kept singing long after the spotlight moved on? And how many artists today could deliver that kind of soul with no auto-tune? Just truth. Tina Marie. When Tina Marie opened her mouth to sing, people didn't just listen, they were stunned. With vocals dripping in soul and deep R&B roots, few could believe that this powerhouse was a petite white woman from California. But Tina wasn't trying to sound black, she was just sounding like herself. Authentic, passionate, and musically fearless, she earned her place in the pantheon of soul legends, not by image, but by talent. Born Mary Christine Brockert in 1956, Tina got her big break at Motown, a rarity in itself. She was one of the label's first white female artists, and famously collaborated with Rick James on I'm a Sucker for Your Love. The chemistry was electric. But Tina quickly proved she didn't need anyone to carry her. With albums like It Must Be Magic Starchild and the timeless ballad Out on a Limb, she created music that resonated across race, genre, and generation. She wasn't just a singer, she was a multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, and producer. When she battled Motown over contract restrictions, she helped usher in the Brockert Initiative, a law that prevented labels from shelving artists without releasing their work, a landmark moment in music rights history. Despite her chart success in the 1980s, the arrival of hip-hop and changing R&B tastes in the 90s edged her out of the spotlight. But her artistry never dulled. She released critically acclaimed albums into the 2000s and maintained a loyal fan base, especially within black communities that had embraced her as one of their own. Her sudden death in 2010 at age 54 shocked the industry. But for those who had followed her journey, it felt like the final note of a soulful symphony the world never fully appreciated. Did you grow up loving Tina's music without ever knowing her story or her fight for artistic freedom? And isn't it time we stop defining soul by color and start recognizing it by conviction? Bobby Womack. Bobby Womack lived his music the way he sang it, rough, real, and full of fire. His voice wasn't polished. It was scarred, full of soul, and unforgettable. Whether writing for others or delivering his own heartbreak anthems, Bobby never faked a note. He sang the truth, even when it hurt. Born in Cleveland in 1944, Bobby's career began with his brothers in the Valentinos, discovered and mentored by Sam Cooke. After Cooke's tragic death, Bobby made headlines for marrying Cooke's widow, a move that nearly destroyed his reputation but didn't stop his music. He played guitar for Aretha Franklin Wilson Pickett and Ray Charles, eventually establishing himself as a solo artist in the late 60s. Hits like That's the Way I Feel About Cha across 110th Street and If You Think You're Lonely now became essential R&B listening. His voice, raw and confessional, made listeners feel every wound he opened. He wasn't just a performer. He was a chronicler of the Black American experience, narrating pain, redemption, addiction, and love with brutal honesty. But behind the music, Bobby battled demons, drugs, heartbreak, and mental health struggles. As the 1980s wore on, his presence in the mainstream faded. Albums were less frequent, radio airplay waned, and a new generation grew up unaware of his contributions. In 2012, he made a powerful comeback with The Bravest Man in the Universe, produced by Damon Albarn. Critics raved, but the moment was brief. 2 years later, Bobby Womack passed away at age 70. Did you ever realize that the man behind the gritty soundtracks of urban life was also one of R&B's greatest songwriters? Or did the industry let you forget? William Bell. When you think of the Stax Records' sound, gritty, gospel-rooted Southern soul, you might immediately name Otis Redding or Isaac Hayes. But without William Bell, that blueprint may never have existed. As one of Stax's first and most enduring artists, Bell helped lay the foundation for an entire genre. Yet over time, his name quietly faded into the background. Born in Memphis in 1939, William Bell started out singing in church before being drafted into the music business. His 1961 debut single, You Don't Miss Your Water, became one of the earliest and most definitive soul ballads covered later by everyone from Otis Redding to Brian Eno. His smooth, understated delivery gave him a timeless appeal, emotional without being overdone. Throughout the 60s and early 70s, Bell delivered a steady stream of classics including Everybody Loves a Winner, I Forgot to Be Your Lover, and the duet Private Number with Judy Clay. His songwriting prowess extended to other artists penning hits like Born Under a Bad Sign for Albert King. But when Stax collapsed in the mid-70s, William Bell's career took a hit too. Without major label support, he continued releasing albums through smaller outlets, but his work rarely made it to the mainstream. By the 1980s, he had virtually disappeared from the airwaves, a foundational figure suddenly missing from the narrative. Then, nearly 4 decades after his peak, Bell re-emerged with This Is Where I Live in 2016, an album that won him a Grammy and reminded the world of his enduring talent. It was a poetic comeback, but one that left many wondering, why did we forget him in the first place? Have you ever heard a song you loved without realizing? William Bell probably wrote it, and doesn't a voice like his deserve more than a footnote in soul history? Lou Rawls, with a voice smoother than satin and deeper than midnight, Lou Rawls could make anything sound elegant, from jazz standards to soulful ballads. His signature baritone wasn't just heard. It was felt, commanding respect from the stage to the studio. At his peak, Rawls was a masterclass in vocal control and timeless sophistication. But as the music industry shifted, the man once synonymous with class and cool slowly disappeared from center stage. Born in Chicago in 1933, Lou began his career in gospel alongside childhood friend Sam Cooke, and transitioned into jazz and soul by the early 1960s. His breakout came with Love Is a Hurtin' Thing in 1966, and he went on to record over 60 albums, including the platinum-selling All Things in Time, which featured the iconic You'll Never Find Another Love Like Mine. That song topped the R&B charts in 1976 and became his signature anthem. Unlike many of his peers, Rawls had crossover appeal. He hosted variety shows, voiced commercials, and served as a visible spokesperson for the Black community. His smooth persona landed him in commercials for Budweiser and on TV specials that showcased his versatility. But as R&B evolved in the 1980s toward more youthful, synth-heavy sounds, Lou's polished, traditional style was pushed aside. He continued recording and performing, including regular appearances at jazz festivals, but was no longer a fixture on mainstream radio. Lou Rawls passed away in 2006 at age 72 with multiple Grammys to his name, yet younger audiences often remembered him more for beer ads than for the voice that once ruled the charts. Did you know that before he became the Budweiser guy, Lou Rawls was one of soul's most sophisticated vocalists? And how many voices like his are left in music today? Or have we traded velvet for volume? Gene Chandler. Gene Chandler didn't just sing soul, he embodied it, complete with cape crown and a swagger that made you remember his name. When Duke of Earl stormed the charts in 1962, it wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural event. The song hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and earned Gene a nickname that stuck for life: the Duke. Born Eugene Dixon in Chicago, Gene started his career in doo-wop groups before going solo. Duke of Earl sold over 1 million copies and established him as a national star. But while many early 60s acts faded when Motown and funk took over, Gene adapted. In the 70s, he embraced the new soul era with tracks like Groovy Situation, and later even dipped into disco with Get Down. What set Gene Chandler apart was his resilience. He wasn't afraid to evolve from romantic crooner to funk frontman to disco revivalist. He even moved into producing and running his own record label, helping develop the next generation of talent. But despite his versatility and business acumen, the music industry and public memory began to forget. By the 1980s, mainstream radio no longer made space for artists like Chandler, whose style wasn't flashy enough for MTV, nor edgy enough for the hip-hop era. Though he continued to perform on the oldies circuit and was inducted into the R&B Hall of Fame, many casual fans remembered only one song, Duke of Earl. Gene never stopped performing. He remained committed to the music that made him. But in a fast-moving industry, even a Duke can be dethroned by time. Is it fair that one of R&B's most adaptable artists who evolved through doo-wop, soul, and disco is remembered mostly for a single early hit? And how many legends like Gene Chandler do we overlook simply because they didn't stop to shout louder? These 20 black R&B and soul artists didn't just sing, they shaped history, broke barriers, and poured truth into every note. Yet many were sidelined, forgotten, or dismissed as one-hit wonders. At Legends of Black Excellence, we believe their stories deserve more than silence. So now we ask you, was it changing tastes, industry neglect, or something deeper that caused their disappearance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which artist do you think was most unfairly overlooked? Let's honor their legacy and make sure they're never erased from the soundtrack of Black Excellence.